get a man into the British Army.
That man would be volunteer Sean Garland, who immediately travelled from Dublin to Armagh and joined the Royal Irish Fusiliers.
Charlie and I made journeys up, met Garland. He brought us out all the information. He even suggested that we attend a dance on a Friday night, which was attended by all the local girls in Armagh City. We took over 100 photographs with a Minox camera of all aspects of the barracks. 4 of us went up in the car and approached the barracks. One of the 4 got out, went to the sentry, held up the sentry. The main body of men stayed in the town in a truck.
By extraordinary coincidence, the raid had coincided with the official visit of a high-ranking British Army general. As a result, every weapon in the base had been secured in the armoury.
And due to the filming which had been done earlier, they knew exactly where to go, opened the armoury and held up those in the armoury.
With the guard overpowered, the truck containing the rest of the team, dressed in a motley assortment of British Army surplus, purchased in a shop in Dublin, was ushered into the base by an IRA volunteer.
We took every weapon that was in the barracks. The alarm wasn't raised until 4 hours later. So the soldiers didn't come out, they didn't know what was outside, and they had no weapons anyway. Garland's information was tremendous. The car party, myself and the other 3, stayed on for another 10 minutes. We locked the guard room, locking the prisoners inside, and left. And I felt very elated. Tony McGann was waiting for us, and he was over the moon. He was astounded. He hadn't really, I think, believed that the raid would succeed.
Now, rearmed with British guns, the IRA faced their next challenge. In order to take on the North, it would have to turn its volunteers from raiders into soldiers. At the annual Republican parade, just days after the raid on Gough Barracks, the IRA issued a statement.
Let there be no doubt in the mind of any man or woman in Ireland on this matter. These arms were captured by Republican forces for use against the British occupation forces still in Ireland, and they will be used against them, please God, in due course.
Having stated their intentions publicly, the IRA leaders began to prepare for armed conflict in Northern Ireland. At camps around the country, hundreds of new recruits went into training.
Go me go láidir leis an tréanál, mar hastai wem saidiúr a dhéanamh Jim Hain agus an rud is mó a chorastam na go dúchach an trid agus nach méing ré fan a chunne agus nach mach dóhan tréanála agam.
They could dismantle and assemble a Thompson submachine gun or a 45 in the dark, load it or unload it. The same way with the magazine of the Bren gun, we could load it in the darkness of the night, clip in the rounds and count the rounds. We were very familiar and very well trained then like that because we'd done it over and over and over again.
And there was no doubt but we were training to go into a military situation, and there would be the likelihood of people being killed or imprisoned.
The IRA felt that they had the sympathy of the Dublin government and police who were prepared to turn a blind eye, so long as there were no threat to the state in the south. But they were short of ammunition, And in October 1954, acting on information from their spy in the British Army, Fusilier Sean Garland, 19 volunteers from Cork and Dublin in boiler suits with blackened faces broke into Omagh barracks. The plan was to infiltrate the armory and fill 2 waiting lorries with ammunition.
Prior to going into Omagh, Tony McGann gave one final and very definite instruction. If things went wrong, under no circumstances would any of us accost any civilian, any policeman, any B Special, only members of the British Army.
But the plan failed. Minutes into the raid, the IRA's first gun battle with the British Army since 1921 erupted.
There were 2 lorries and a car waiting outside to take everybody back. The job had failed. I stopped on the road at the back of the 2 lorries, looked back down the road to see if anybody was left behind, and with that the lorries moved off. 8 of us were left behind because there was a lot of confusion, men wounded. I found myself on my own. I knew my way to the border. I came down through the Clogher Valley and I was arrested by a farmer and his 5 sons, and each of them had a rifle pointed at me.
In the hugely publicised trial that followed, the 8 captured Omagh raiders were charged with treason against the Queen. Lengthy sentences were handed down, resulting in a huge surge of support for the IRA.
Due to the fact that the authorities charged us with treason, it gave us a platform to preach, if you like, the Republican gospel. I think the British made a mistake in giving us that platform, because, as I said, it was subsequent to that this huge influx came into the IRA.
In August 1955, the IRA struck again, this time in England itself. A raiding party headed by Rory O'Brodick infiltrated Arborfield Barracks in Berkshire. Within 2 hours, they had captured and tied up 18 British soldiers and driven away 2 vans loaded with 82,000 rounds of ammunition.
Bhí na blianta caiteagain a caint faoi a trid in Aram Hasna. Well, bé seo Aram Hasna os or gór amach agus muinte a múla agus fiera here bhí rudí a tarlan, so the bhí ansásamh a gomháil in a lehéid. Ansásamh go deo.
The victory was short-lived. On the road to London, a suspicious police patrol stopped one of the vans and discovered the haul. Within hours, a TV crew was on hand to record the discovery of an arms dump and the rest of the ammunition. The captured men were given life sentences, resulting in another surge of support for the IRA and Sinn Féin.
Bhí pápéirí mór in na Heorpa ará níl ceist na hÉireann réite fós. The Eternal Rebel, tá sé ar siúl i gcónaí.
It was a great morale boost for us like there then, that we suddenly believed like there then we were going to do something, because we wouldn't have liked to have been like members of an IRA like that was never going to do anything, like, you know, so we said it was just time for action.
In 1956, the IRA finalised a plan it had spent the last year putting in place. The brainchild of its most experienced military man, former Irish Army officer Sean Cronin, it was known as Operation Harvest. The IRA felt that the crop had grown to fruition and just needed their hand to gather it in.
Sean Cronin was a trained military officer, but the difference between the ideal, as he would have it, and what was feasible with what the material, both in terms of equipment and the men that he had, there was a huge difference between the two, and I think in that sense Operation Harvest was very much aspirational.
It envisaged flying columns of up to 25 men crossing the border from the Republic to attack targets in the north, paralysing the institutions of the state, establishing liberated areas which would be made ungovernable, subsequently forcing the British to leave Ireland. Volunteers left their jobs and homes and mobilised. GHQ relocated from Dublin to the border, and 4 IRA columns crossed into the north, armed with rifles, pistols, machine guns and explosives.
Operation Harvest was what became known as the border campaign. It's what most IRA volunteers wanted and were looking for, and they were happy when it did start.
At midnight on the 12th of December 1956, the IRA War of Liberation began. By dawn, the threat it posed was clear. Throughout the night, the province had been rocked by explosions. Police barracks had been bombed and sprayed with bullets. Bridges, courthouses, and even the BBC radio transmitter at Derry had been destroyed. The governments north and south had been taken totally by surprise, as had the Northern IRA, some of whom only found out about the operation the next day, when they were picked up by the RUC. Having arrested all known activists, Stormont moved quickly to introduce internment.
Oh, heave Operation Harvest. Nu hullen much amwer beer Operation Harvest. Gaji bejer me nullig harfa ni jake kui she. Agus and shen vesugin ye grown blood corve ray, the cor rubber, but heave details. Nero fame were in ye fissavegin ye.
The IRA's enemy was Britain and the British Army, but the reality on the ground was that their main adversary was the local RUC and B Special militiamen. Not only were the IRA in hostile territory, they were up against an enemy with superior communications and local knowledge. On the night of the 30th of December 1956, 19 days into the operation, 2 flying columns attacked Derrylin RUC barracks, deploying mines, grenades, machine guns and rifles. In command of one of the columns was Rory O'Braddock.
Near reading on barrack a goal, Coomer, Gar, Galiorgo, fi Jordan jid, nomad, la onsi in a for barrack. Agus in the yishin, monamach se gaffa tibesti, gun nomad sin fiaring imocht.
In the course of the attack, John Scally, a young RUC constable, became the first casualty of the campaign. The IRA had underestimated the strength of Unionist resistance. Soon, they would pay for their mistake.
I was mobilised to go to Monaghan for St. Stephen's Day, where I joined the Pierce column. We went to a dump to pick up our weapons, and we got a lecture on how to behave in the field. We were strictly adhered to the Geneva Convention. We were to carry our arms openly, we were to be uniformed, or at least carry an identifying mark. And to that end, we were all given a tricolour flash that we sewed on our shoulders.
The day after the Derrylin attack, the Pierce flying column drove a hijacked truck towards the RUC barracks at Brookborough, close to the home of Northern Prime Minister Sir Basil Brooke. As they approached their target,